Hi everyone, Aaron here for Zollotech, and iPhone X has been out for quite some time. In fact, it was released in 2017, and it was only available for 1 year. When the iPhone XS and XS Max came out, Apple stopped selling it new on their website. You could still buy it refurbished from their website, and you can still buy it today refurbished. So I wanted to help you decide whether or not you should pick one up in 2020 or upgrade from your iPhone X to something else in 2020. So the first thing is, like I said, you can no longer buy it new from Apple directly, but you can find it refurbished for $599 to $699 for 256 gigabytes. Now that doesn't seem like such a great deal, but you can find this used for as low as around $300 on sites like Craigslist if you want to trust that, or if you get one from a friend, or reputable websites are selling them around $400 to $500. So it just depends where you're getting them, but they're still available in many different ways today, just not new. Now the design has held up really well. In fact, this was a major shift from Apple to a new design. We lost the home button, we gained a little bit of a notch at the top, which you can't see because of this wallpaper that's hiding it, and I'll link this wallpaper in the description as I normally do, but we gained this Face ID sensor and quite a few advances with this phone. We still have this gesture-based system that I like quite a bit, but took a little bit of getting used to, and it's held up really well and still looks modern. In fact, if I show you the front of this next to, say, one of the modern iPhone 11 Pros or 11 Pro Max, you would think it's just the baby brother of the 11 Pro Max, for example. So they look the same in almost every way, except for the back where the camera's a little bit different. Now the construction of the 10 is stainless steel, and that's what they're using on the high-end iPhones today. So stainless steel around the outside edge, and then glass front and back. And there are some advantages to the iPhone X over some of the newer models as well, I'll talk about in a moment. But the first major change was Face ID, and you may love it or you may not like it, but this was the first phone with it, and it works pretty well. So let me turn the screen on. I'll swipe up, and it's a little bit slower than the current version of Face ID, but it does work fine. You can pick it up, swipe up and unlock, and it's still fairly fast. The new phones may be a half a second faster, in some cases 1 second faster. Overall, though, it's great. This was also Apple's first OLED display, and it's held up pretty well. It's HDR10 compatible. It's 5.8 inches, 1125 by 2436 with 458 pixels per inch. It also has True Tone, so if you like True Tone, you can turn that on. I tend to turn it off for these videos as I want the whites of the display to look white and not be tinted based on what Apple thinks white should look like. So I leave that off most of the time, but it does have that. And one feature that the iPhone X has that the newest phones don't have is 3D Touch. So that makes it feel sort of more modern, even though the new phones removed it and they're newer. You still have a pressure-sensitive layer under the display so that you can do 3D Touch, pop things open quicker. And in fact, if I go to the iPhone 11 Pro Max, for example, and I press on settings at the same time, you'll see it's much faster on the iPhone X. I'll do the same with music. And let me try it again. There we go. So sometimes you have to try it a couple times on the newer phones because it's haptic touch and pressure sensitive. It's much better on the pressure-based system. So unfortunately, Apple removed that to make room probably for newer display technology, maybe micro LED in the future, but 3D Touch is here and works better, even though it doesn't have the exact same feel that it did with iOS 12 and earlier. Now, battery life of the iPhone X may be its biggest downfall as compared to the newest phones, where Apple really went all out on the battery and increased the battery size significantly. So on the iPhone 11, 11 Pro, 11 Pro Max, the batteries are much bigger and much better than even the XS and XS Max. So you're still going to get probably 5 to 6 hours of screen on time. You're going to get about the same or more than an iPhone 8 Plus, but it's still not as good as the latest iPhones, where Apple really increased the battery size and the efficiency of the processor inside to help deal with battery drain, and they're just so much better. You're going to get 12 hours of screen on time with the newest phones, so it's almost double the battery life in many instances. But that doesn't mean the iPhone X doesn't hold up well today. In fact, the speed of it's quite good. It has the same same processor and the same RAM that you get with an iPhone 8 Plus. It was released the same year, and so tasks in general feel fast. Now, using apps is going to give you the same experience that you would get on something such as an 11 Pro Max. You're barely going to be able to notice the difference, and occasionally you might get a little bit of a frame rate drop or stutter, but it's very rare. You'll see things look very smooth overall. And so using applications in general should be no problem on this phone. If you're heavy on games, those could take a little bit. I just installed Monument Valley 2 again, but it just opened for the first time, and you see how fast it loads. So we can resume, and we're right into a game that looks beautiful and works really well. And while it's not the most intensive game for your iPhone, most games are going to run very similar to the current iPhones. They're designed to run very smoothly, and you'll have basically the same experience on all iPhones. So you'll see the animations are fast, no issues here. And if we want to move the character around, you're not going to have any issues in any game you can play, because this will play every game available for iPhone. You'll still have the AR capability using the cameras on the back. And speaking of the cameras are quite good. In fact, some people say they're better than the XS or XS Max. They like the color of them a little bit better. So if I just snap a quick picture here of the back of the phone on the 11 Pro Max, the picture comes out nice, it's nice and clear, and most people, unless they're into photography, are not going to be able to distinguish between the 11 Pro Max and the iPhone 10 camera unless you blow it up onto a huge screen. Now, the forward-facing camera is quite good, but you're not going to get the same experience that you do on the newest phones. That's where the big difference is. You have a 1080p camera on the forward-facing camera when it comes to video. So selfies and things will look pretty similar, but it's a 7-megapixel camera as opposed to a 12-megapixel camera on the newer phones. So it holds up just as well as many of the others. If you get an iPhone XR, for example, you're going to have the same forward-facing camera. But any of the latest phones from 2019 or that are available in early 2020, you're going to have a worse camera on the iPhone 10. So not a huge difference, but it is something to note when it comes to the iPhone 10. Now, one big advantage that the iPhone 10 has over some of the older phones, if you get the Verizon variant, is that it will have a Qualcomm modem in it. And what that means is you're probably going to have better connectivity. You're not going to have as many issues with cellular loss or drops or connection issues. So if you can find a Verizon variant that's unlocked, it will work with any GSM carrier, including AT&T and T-Mobile. If you can find a non-GSM variant, the worldwide CDMA variant that worked with Verizon or Sprint, that is the version that you want with your iPhone if you get the 10. And that will give you much better reception, better reliability, because Apple switched to Intel modems in the newer phones, and they're just not as good as the 10. So yes, the 10 is definitely workable in 2020. There's only one consideration to talk about, and that's PWM. Now, the iPhone 10 has an OLED display which uses PWM, or pulse width modulation, to control brightness. I've talked about this at length in separate videos, and I mention in any phone that has an OLED display, because the iPhone controls brightness on the display by flickering the display faster or slower. The quicker it's flickering, the brighter it seems. So as I turn the display brightness up, it's going to flicker faster. As I turn it down, it's going to flicker slower. And this may or may not be a consideration for you, but on the iPhone 10, the actual rate of PWM, or speed at which it's flickering, is low enough that it could cause you to feel very nauseated, you could get dizzy, or you could even get headaches. And I've seen this at length with a lot of people with the iPhone 10, XS, and XS Max. The iPhone 11, they seemingly fixed it some, and they've sped up that rate so it doesn't bother as many people, myself included. 1 in 10 people is affected by this. So if you're sensitive to light or sensitive to flickering or anything like that, you may want to actually consider a newer iPhone or an LCD display, because those don't work that way. Now, as far as screen burn-in, or the phone actually leaving ghosted images on the display, even though the display is on something different, that's not really an issue for iPhones that I've seen too much. On the iPhone 10, you can see here's a white background. If I swipe to the left, here's a gray background. There's no ghosted images anywhere around the display, and you're not going to see that in most of Apple's displays, because they do a really good job of managing screen burn-in. So it's not really an issue for most people. And that's really it for the iPhone 10. So does it make sense to buy one? I would say yes, if you can get one at a reasonable price and PWM doesn't bother you. If you can only find it refurbished for $700, I would go with a newer phone. I would go for an iPhone 11 or even spend an extra few $100 once you're up that high and get an iPhone 11 Pro. If you can find this or you're getting it as a hand-me-down for $500 or less, it's a good buy. It will be supported for years to come when it comes to software updates. I would expect at least 2 to 3 more years with no issues, maybe even longer. We don't really know because Apple doesn't give us a time frame or a table of when they're going to discontinue support, but based on the past, you have about 5 years total. So we at least have a couple more years, but they seem to be extending that even further now. So it really shouldn't be an issue. But let me know what you think of iPhone 10. If you have one, if you've upgraded, if you're considering one, I'd love to hear what you have to say about it in the comments below. If you haven't subscribed already though, please subscribe. And if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. As always, thanks for watching. This is Aaron. I'll see you next time.